The Time Traveler's Wife is the debut novel of American author Audrey Niffenegger, published in 2003. It is a love story about a man with a genetic disorder that causes him to time travel unpredictably, and about his wife, an artist, who has to cope with his frequent absences and dangerous experiences. Niffenegger, frustrated in love when she began the work, wrote the story as a metaphor for her failed relationships. The tale's central relationship came to her suddenly and subsequently supplied the novel's title. The novel, which has been classified as both science fiction and romance, examines issues of love, loss, and free will. In particular, it uses time travel to explore miscommunication and distance in relationships, while also investigating deeper existential questions. As a first-time novelist, Niffenegger had trouble finding a literary agent. She eventually sent the novel to Macadam Cage unsolicited, and after an auction took place for the rights, Niffenegger selected them as her publishers. The book became a bestseller after an endorsement from author and family friend Scott Turow on The Today Show, and as of March 2009 had sold nearly 2.5 million copies in the United States and the United Kingdom. Many reviewers were impressed with Niffenegger's unique perspectives on time travel. Some praised her characterization of the couple, applauding their emotional depth. Others criticized her writing style as melodramatic and the plot as emotionally trite. The novel won the exclusive Bookspoke Prize and a British Book Award. A film version was released in August 2009, using alternating first-person perspectives. The novel tells the stories of Henry de Tamble, born 1963, a librarian at the Newberry Library in Chicago, and his wife, Claire Ann Abshire, born 1971, an artist who makes paper sculptures. Henry has a rare genetic disorder, which comes to be known as chrono impairment, that causes him to involuntarily travel through time. When 20-year-old Claire meets 28-year-old Henry at the Newberry Library in 1991 at the opening of the novel, he has never seen her before. Although she has known him most of her life, Henry begins time traveling at the age of 5, jumping forward and backward relative to his own timeline. When he leaves, where he goes, or how long his trips will last are all beyond his control. His destinations are tied to his subconscious. He most often travels to places and times related to his own history. Certain stimuli such as stress can trigger Henry's time traveling. He often goes jogging to keep calm and remain in the present. He searches out pharmaceuticals in the future that may be able to help control his time traveling. He also seeks the advice of a geneticist, Dr. Kendrick. Henry cannot take anything with him into the future or the past. He always arrives naked and then struggles to find clothing, shelter, and food. He amasses a number of survival skills including lockpicking, self-defense, and pickpocketing. Much of this he learns from older versions of himself once their timelines converged naturally at the library. Their first meeting in his chronology, Henry starts to travel to Claire's childhood and adolescence in South Haven, Michigan, beginning in 1977 when she is 6 years old. On one of his early visits, from her perspective, Henry gives her a list of the dates he will appear and she writes them in a diary so she will remember to provide him with clothes and food when he arrives. During another visit, he inadvertently reveals that they will be married in the future. Over time, they develop a close relationship. At one point, Henry helps Claire frighten and humiliate a boy who abused her. Claire is last visited in her youth by Henry in 1989, on her 18th birthday, during which they make love for the first time. They are then separated for 2 years until their meeting at the library. Claire and Henry marry, but Claire has trouble bringing a pregnancy to term because of the genetic anomaly Henry may presumably be passing on to the fetus. After 6 miscarriages, Henry wishes to save Claire further pain and has a vasectomy. However, a version of Henry from the past visits Claire one night and they make love. She subsequently gives birth to a daughter, Alba. Alba is diagnosed with chrono impairment as well, but unlike Henry, she has some control over her destinations when she time travels. Before she is born, Henry travels to the future and meets his 10-year-old daughter on a school field trip and learns that he dies when she is 5 years old, when he is 43. During what is to be his last year of life, Henry time travels to a Chicago parking garage on a frigid winter night where he is unable to find shelter. As a result of the hypothermia and frostbite he suffers, his feet are amputated when he returns to the present. Henry and Claire both know that without the ability to escape when he time travels, Henry will certainly die within his next few jumps. On New Year's Eve 2006, Henry time travels into the middle of the Michigan woods in 1984 and is accidentally shot by Claire's brother, a scene foreshadowed earlier in the novel. Henry returns to the present and dies in Claire's arms. Claire is devastated by Henry's death. She later finds a letter from Henry asking her to stop waiting for him, but which describes a moment in her future when she will see him again. The last scene in the book takes place when Claire is 82 years old and Henry is 43. She is waiting for Henry, as she has done most of her life. Niffenegger is an artist who teaches at the Center for Book and Paper Arts at Columbia College Chicago, where she prepares editions of hand-painted books. She produced some of her earlier works in editions of 10 copies, which were sold in art galleries. However, she decided that The Time Traveler's Wife would have to be a novel. I got the idea for the title, and when I draw I have this big drawing table covered with brown paper, and I write ideas down on the paper. So I wrote down this title, and after a while I started to think about it. I couldn't think of a way to make it a picture book because still pictures don't represent time very well. So I decided to write a novel. She was intrigued by the title because it immediately defined two people and their relationship to each other. Niffenegger said that its source was an epigraph to J.B. Priestley's 1964 novel Man in Time. Clock time is our bank manager, tax collector, police inspector. This inner time is our wife, drawing her central theme from this image. She says, Henry is not only married to Claire, he's also married to time. Other authors whom Niffenegger has cited as influencing the book include Richard Powers, David Foster Wallace, Henry James, and Dorothy Sayers. She has said the story is a metaphor for her own failed love affairs and that I had kind of got the idea that there's not going to be some fabulous perfect soulmate out there for me, so I'll just make him up. She also drew on her parents' marriage for inspiration. Her father spent the bulk of each week traveling. Despite the story's analogies to her own life, Niffenegger has forcefully stated that Claire is not a self-portrait. She's radically different. I am much more willful and headstrong. I don't think I could go through a lifetime waiting for someone to appear, no matter how fascinating he was. Niffenegger began writing the novel in 1997. The last scene, in which an aged Claire is waiting for Henry, was written first, because it is the story's focal point. The narrative was originally structured thematically, responding to comments from readers of early drafts of the manuscript. Niffenegger reorganized the narrative so that it largely followed Claire's timeline. The work was finished in 2001. With no history of commercial publication, Niffenegger had trouble finding interested literary agents. 25 rejected the manuscript. In 2002, she sent it unsolicited to the small, San Francisco-based publisher Macadam Cage, where it reached Anika Streitfeld. Streitfeld, who became Niffenegger's editor, thought it was incredible. Right from the very beginning you feel like you are in capable hands, that this is someone who has a story to tell and who knows how to tell it. She gave it to David Poindexter, the founder of the publishing firm, who read it overnight and decided to buy the book. However, Niffenegger had acquired an agent by this time, and several publishing houses in New York City were interested in the novel. The manuscript was put up for auction and McAdam Cage bid $100,000. By far the largest sum it had ever offered for a book. Although another publisher outbid them, Niffenegger selected McAdam Cage because they were so dedicated to her work. Also, Niffenegger explains that her own natural inclination is to go small. My background is in punk music. I'd always pick the indie company over the giant corporation. Reviewers have found The Time Traveler's Wife difficult to classify generically. Some categorize it as science fiction, others as a romance. Niffenegger herself is reluctant to label the novel, saying she never thought of it as science fiction, even though it has a science fiction premise. In Niffenegger's view, the story is primarily about Henry and Claire's relationship and the struggles they endure. She has said that she based Claire and Henry's romance on the cerebral coupling of Dorothy Sayers' characters Lord Peter Wimsey and Harriet Fane. Time travel stories to which the novel has been compared include Jack Finney's Time and Again, 1970, F. Monsieur Busby's short story, If This Is Winnetka, You Must Be Judy, and the film Somewhere in Time, 1980. Henry has been compared to Billy Pilgrim of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, 1969. Science fiction writer Terence Mr. Green calls the novel a timeslip romance. The Time Traveler's Wife is not as concerned with the paradoxes of time travel as is traditional science fiction. Instead, as critic Mark Mohan describes, the novel uses time travel as a metaphor to explain how two people can feel as if they've known each other their entire lives. Robert Nathan's portrait of Jenny, as novel or film, is another obvious comparison. Although Jenny, as a ghost, travels time in one direction, not randomly, elements of the plot, particularly the list, bear comparison with Heinlein's 1941 By His Bootstraps, and in turn, with River Song's Diary in the long-running British sci-fi show Doctor Who. Niffenegger identifies the themes of the novel as mutants, love, death, amputation, sex, and time. Reviewers have focused on love, loss, and time. As Charlie Lee Potter writes in The Independent, the novel is an elegy to love and loss. The love between Henry and Claire is expressed in a variety of ways, including through an analysis and history of the couple's sex life. While much of the novel shows Henry and Claire falling in love, the end is darker and time travel becomes a means for representing arbitrariness, transience, plain bad luck. According to the Boston Globe's Judith Moss, as Andrew Billen argues in The Times, the book may even serve as a feminist analysis of marriage as a partnership in which only the male is conceded the privilege of absence. Several reviewers noted that time travel represents relationships in which couples cannot quite communicate with each other. Natasha Walter of The Guardian describes the story's attention to the sense of slippage that you get in any relationship, that you could be living through a slightly different love story from the one your partner is experiencing. She points, for example, to the section of the book which describes the first time Claire and Henry make love. She is 18 and he is 41, already married to her in his present. After this interlude, he returns to his own time and his own Claire, who says, "Henry's been gone for almost 24 hours now. And as usual I'm torn between thinking obsessively about when and where he might be and being pissed at him for not being here." I hear Henry whistling as he comes up the path through the garden into the studio. He stomps the snow off his boots and shrugs off his coat. He's looking marvelous, really happy. My heart is racing and I take a wild guess. May 24th, 1989? Quote, "Yes. Oh, yes." Henry scoops me up and swings me around. Now I'm laughing. We're both laughing. The novel raises questions about determinism and free will. For example, critic Dan Falk asks, Given that journey has already happened, should he not simply be compelled to act precisely as he remembers seeing himself act? Or perhaps he is compelled, and merely feels he has a choice. Quote, although Henry seemingly cannot alter the future, the characters do not become cynical and, according to Lee Potter, the novel demonstrates that people can be changed through love. Walter notes that there is a quasi-religious sense to the inevitability of Henry's and Claire's lives and deaths. Niffenegger, however, believes that the novel does not depict destiny but rather randomness and meaninglessness. The hardback edition of The Time Traveler's Wife was published in the United States in September 2003 by Macadam Cage and in the United Kingdom by Random House on 1 January 2004. Macadam Cage initiated an extensive marketing drive, including advertising in the New York Times and the New Yorker and a promotional book tour by Niffenegger. As a result, the novel debuted at number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list after popular crime writer Scott Turow, whose wife is a friend of Niffenegger, endorsed it on the Today Show. The first print run of 15,000 sold out and 100,000 more copies were printed. In Britain, the book received a boost from its choice as a Richard and Judy Book Club recommendation. Nearly 45,000 copies were sold in 1 week. It was named the 2003 Amazon.com Book of the Year. A December 2003 article in The Observer reported that although a tiny minority of American reviewers felt that the novel was gimmicky, it was still a publishing sensation. At that point, the novel had been sold to publishers in 15 countries. As of March 2009, it had sold almost 1.5 million copies in the United States and 1 million in the United Kingdom. The success of The Time Traveler's Wife prompted almost every major publishing firm to attempt to acquire Niffenegger's second novel, Her Fearful Symmetry, which has been called one of the most eagerly sought-after works in recent publishing history. It garnered an advance of $5 million from Scribner's. Reviewers praised Niffenegger's characterization of Henry and Claire, particularly their emotional depth. Michelle Griffin of The Age noted that although Henry is custom designed for the fantasy lives of bookish ladies, his flaws, particularly his violent, argumentative, depressive nature, make him a strong, well-rounded character. Charles DeLint wrote in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction that one of Niffenegger's greatest accomplishments in the novel was her ability to convey the emotional growth of Claire and Henry in character arcs while at the same time alternating their perspectives. Stephen Amidon of The Times, however, questioned the selfishness of the central characters. Most reviewers were impressed with the premise of the novel, but critical of its melodramatic style. While Griffin praised the plot and concept as clever, she argued that Niffenegger's writing is usually pedestrian and the story at times contrived. Heidi Derrick of the National Post agreed, contending that the story has an excess of overwrought emotional moments which never quite add up to a fully developed plot. Writing in the Chicago Tribune, Carrie Harrison praised the originality of the novel, specifically the intersection of childbearing and time travel. Despite appreciating the novel's premise, Amidon complained that the implications of Henry's time traveling were poorly thought out. For example, Henry has foreknowledge of the September 11th attacks but does nothing to try to prevent them this year. Instead, on the 11th of September 2001, he gets up early to listen to the world being normal for a little while longer. Amidon also criticized the novel's overall clumsiness, writing that Niffenegger is a ham-fisted stylist, long-winded and given to sudden eruptions of cliché. Miriam Shaviv agreed to an extent, writing in the Jerusalem Post, "There are no original or even non-cliched messages here. True love, Niffenegger seems to be telling us, is timeless, and can survive even the worst circumstances. And yet, the book is a page-turner." Delicately crafted and psychologically sound, the Library Journal described the novel as skillfully written with a blend of distinct characters and heartfelt emotions. It recommended that public libraries purchase multiple copies of the book. On September 23, 2013, it was announced that a sequel to the novel is in the works. The sequel will focus on Henry and Claire's daughter Alba as an adult. She finds herself in love with two different men, Zach, a normal man, and Oliver, a musician and fellow time traveler. The first 25 pages are currently available with the purchase of the Time Traveler's Wife ebook. In February 2014, Niffenegger estimated that the book should be ready in 2018 or so. In March 2017, Niffenegger stated on Twitter that the sequel would be called The Other Husband but didn't expect it to be released before 2019. BBC Audio published an audiobook of The Time Traveler's Wife that was narrated by William Hope and Laurel Lefkoe. Described as feisty readers in one review, Highbridge also produced an unabridged version in 2003. Which is 12 hours long and narrated by Maggie Magritte and Christopher Burns. Their performance has been described as sincere and passionate. The 2006 Audible Highbridge version is narrated by Fred Berman and Phoebe Stroll and is 1743 in length. Audible.co.uk produced an unabridged version in 2008. Also narrated by Hope and Lefkoe. The film rights for The Time Traveler's Wife were optioned by Brad Pitt's production company Plan B Entertainment, in association with New Line Cinema, before the novel was even published. The adaptation was written by Bruce Joe Rubin and directed by Robert Schwentke, and stars Rachel McAdams and Eric Bana. Filming began in September 2007 and the movie was released by Warner Brothers on the 14th of August 2009. When asked about the prospect of her novel being turned into a film, Niffenegger said, "I've got my little movie that runs in my head, and I'm kind of afraid that will be changed or wiped out by what somebody else might do with it. And it is sort of thrilling and creepy, because now the characters have an existence apart from me." In general, the film received mixed to negative reviews. For example, The New York Times wrote that the film was an often ridiculous, awkward, unsatisfying and dour melodramatic adaptation. In July 2018, HBO secured